Fox News Alert, one of the biggest meetings of Donald Trump's new presidency happening right now. Mr. Trump meeting with German Chancellor Angela Merkel at the White House ahead of a joint news conference. This as both leaders have not exactly had a smooth history. This is Outnumbered. I'm Sandra Smith, here today, Harris Faulkner. Meghan McCain, National Security Council staffer under Presidents Bush and Obama. Jillian Turner is here, and today's hashtag One Lucky Guy, a couch first-timer. Please help us welcome the former White House press secretary under President George W. Bush, Ari Fleischer. And you are outnumbered, sir.
And I'm a freshman. Thank you for having me the first time.
Welcome on this fine Friday.
It's good to be with you guys.
Today, going to mix it all in, and Ari Fleischer. I'm talking great day.
So much going on. Great to have you. All right, let's begin with the big meeting between President Trump and Chancellor Merkel. The White House saying the agenda includes discussions on strengthening NATO, fighting ISIS, and resolving Ukraine's conflict. The highly anticipated sit-down comes after President Trump repeatedly slammed the German leader on the campaign trail, accusing her of ruining Germany by allowing an influx of refugees from Syria. And Merkel herself has been highly critical of the president's immigration travel ban. Kevin Cork joins us live from the White House with more. Kevin?
Oh, just mix it up, why don't you? You're just trying to stir the pot. You're trying to create trouble.
Yes,
but
always.
The truth is,
always.
Probably rightly so, right? I mean, listen, I'd love to be a fly on the wall for that meeting. This is Merkel's first trip here to the White House during the Trump presidency, obviously. In fact, her first trip back here in a couple of years, to be actually specific. And I have to admit, there are a number of important topics that the two world leaders will want to sort of knock out. So let's sort of just give you some bullet points so the folks at home can just sort of follow along and understand what we expect really to be hammered on today. Trade, big one today. Merkel, in fact, traveling with the CEOs of both BMW and Siemens. They want to talk about this reciprocity. You're going to hear that word vis-a-vis tax policy and trade policy between the two nations. Security cooperation, you mentioned that. Refugees and migrant crisis showing no signs of letting up in Europe, and a frank conversation about NATO and the U.S. role there. The president has been skeptical about NATO. He says, look, other members need to pay their fair share. Germany, not quite at the 2% number that they're supposed to hit. They're checking in at about 1.23%.
We strongly support NATO. We only ask that all of the NATO members make their full and proper financial contributions to the NATO alliance, which many of them have not been doing. Many of them have not been even close, and they have to do that.
Obviously, they're going to talk a great deal about the refugee crisis that's been overwhelming Europe. As you pointed out, Sandra, the president making no bones about the fact that he thought that Merkel made a catastrophic mistake in allowing nearly 1 million refugees into Germany. And keep this in mind, and I think this is important, Sandra. The two leaders are going to have to speak not just to each other, but to their respective domestic audiences. The president's going to say, hey, listen, what they did doesn't work there, and it certainly won't work here. Merkel, meanwhile, will have to sort of stand up for her own policies and speak to her specific audience. It should make for a very interesting news conference coming your way at about 1:20.
Very shortly. All right, Kevin Cork, very good to see you. Thank you.
You bet.
All right, Ari, great to have you here. Kevin just set it up for us. This is a big moment for Donald Trump's very young presidency. Do you see this meeting, will it be amicable?
Oh, it'll be amicable because it must be amicable. That's diplomacy. This is the way leaders are when they gather with each other. But there's a lot of serious things to talk about, and Donald Trump, the outsider, has done some things that are going to make it a harder relationship and an easier relationship. It'll start out harder because when you say a foreign president or chancellor has ruined her nation, that gets you off on a difficult start. Yeah. Nobody likes to hear that you've ruined your nation, says a visiting president. So he's got a little diplomacy to make up for, and I think that it's going to, she said things that will upset her. He's also weighed in on internal German affairs by talking about their refugee policies. We don't like other nations to talk about what our border policies are. He regularly talks about other nations, and typically in diplomacy, you don't do that. The other side, though, where he is absolutely on the high ground, and I hope he's successful, is only 5 of the 28 nations in NATO pay their 2% or more of GDP on defense, as they're required to do to be NATO members. Germany does not, and the 5 that do are the United States, Poland, Estonia, the United Kingdom, and Greece. The major European allies are not pulling their fair share of the weight, and they need to.
And these are going to be serious discussions that they're having today. I mean, you just hit on some of the topics: NATO, Ukraine, fighting ISIS. A big meeting happening right now. Jillian?
Yeah, So just to tag on to what Ari was saying there, and folks on social media get mad at me when I talk about why the United States needs other countries, but the reality is that we do. And there's a couple of really big, important reasons we need Germany these days, and why President Trump and the Chancellor are going to be forced to really come together and knock heads on these issues. One is, in the wake of Brexit, Germany is really going to be the only major power center inside the European Union, and we're going to need them to really use them as an inroad for us to exert influence across Europe. The other thing that we really kind of need to work with them on in a much better way is intelligence sharing. That's a relationship that has kind of fallen by the wayside in recent years and needs to be built back up. And so I think that's something they're probably going to be focusing on today, how the United States and Germany can work more cooperatively in the intelligence space. That's something that'll help everybody.
To quote Angela Merkel leading up to this meeting, she told a German newspaper, Harris, it's always better to talk with each other than about each other.
Well, that's for certain, right? But I'm really looking forward to this news conference this afternoon on one of the topics that you mentioned, Ari, and it has to do with the refugee situation and illegal immigration and how you deal with all of that. You say that normally you don't talk about what another country does, but President Trump is so different.
That's right.
Because he has talked about that, and he talks about his own, which we normally don't do either. So I look forward to that bilateral news conference today at about 1:20 or so Eastern, because you'll have those reporters, those newspapers represented in that room, and it'll be really interesting to see what the texture of the questions are. Is she going to have to be on the defense and say, well, this is why we let 1 million people in? And it didn't work out, or it did work out. What could she possibly say?
Well, I think she's going to take the step that defending what she's done and is very proud.
Is there
Germany,
a defense?
Oh, surely. I think when you do what Germany has gone through in terms of integrating East Germany into West Germany after the collapse of communism.
Oh, sure.
And when you look
history.
What it means, though, for Angela Merkel who came from East Germany, is that Germany has a tradition of bringing people in who didn't necessarily fit the old West German model. And that extends to immigrants. And that's extended, as Germany has taken a proud stand for, to refugees fleeing. In some cases, to their own detriment.
Yeah.
Their own internal controversy.
The sexual assault.
She's already admitted that herself.
Cologne.
The Chancellor has admitted that if she could kind of go back in time to a few years ago and start this whole process over, she would certainly adjust a few things.
But Megan, when she stands up there at that joint news conference, we're all going to be thinking about those moments on the campaign trail when he said, as Kevin Cork just brought up, when he criticized her for ruining Germany.
Well, I have to say, I mean, just in my own personal experience, some of the people who have trash talked me the most that I later became friends with actually were really helpful to me in my career and in my life, because they give you honest feedback. So I actually have hope that these two people who are, to say that they're dissimilar in personality and ideology is putting it very nicely. So this is one of those meetings where, instead of sort of like with Shinzo Abe, where there's a lot of love there, there's a lot of love between those two countries, that this is actually going to be a first test for President Trump with diplomacy on the other side. And Chancellor Merkel is kind of like the last remaining figure of the leftist, globalist era of Obama that really took over a lot of Europe and the United States, and has clearly gone out the window with a populist movement in Europe, you know, eclipsing with Brexit. So she represents an entirely different ideology, an entirely different worldview. Yeah. So it will definitely be interesting to see what they can come together
on. Well, and President Obama spoke there. I mean, you had the actual visual of the president being there. But, you know, back to this idea of how they will put out an outward public representation of what went on behind closed doors. I'm curious, from your experience, how much of that is real? Like, are we going to see that play out at the news conference, or do you think there's a whole lot that will be held back?
Listen, even for Donald Trump, the outsider who came to Washington to change and to break things, they're going to get along. You know, I used to be a fly on the wall. I used to have a chair in those rooms. And so I'd watch these heads of state get together. And invariably, they figure out how to get along. They don't want to clash. Leaders don't want to do the clashing. If there's clashing to be done, they let it be done by subordinate levels.
Oh, not even in private.
Well, also, Megan points out...
Not in any sharp or pronounced way. They will tend to talk about the things that they agree about and then downplay the things they don't know. Is Donald Trump different? Is he going to put it on the table and pound his fist? I don't think so. He didn't do that with the Mexican leader. So I think he saves that for the public and doesn't do it in the private.
I was going to say, you know, what Meg was saying about how on a personality level they're very different. The one thing that's interesting, though, is that we all know that President Trump admires strong leaders, as he calls them. she is many things, you know, you can levy many criticisms at her, but she's been a very strong leader for Germany. And in that respect, I wonder if he might not actually kind of like her.
Another interesting factor about her is that she's done a lot of business with Putin, and we all know that Donald Trump has a very interesting relationship with Putin, and I'd be interested to know if they end up discussing her interactions and how she feels about the Ukraine, because that's one of the topics we know is going to come up in their meeting today. And again, an entirely different worldview from what we've seen so far on Putin and the Ukraine than President Trump currently has.
You know, Megan's making a great point here, because Germany decided to turn off all its nuclear power plants. Germany turned itself into a suburb of Moscow when it comes to energy reliance. They get so much of their natural gas now from Moscow that they gave up energy independence, or an attempt to get it. And so Germany is a huge trading partner with Moscow, which puts her in a different...
Something else to throw into this conversation is that Bloomberg's reporting that she, before she left for this U.S. visit with our president, she spoke to the Chinese president to reaffirm, quote, their common support for free trade and open markets. You wonder what sort of discussion or questions they may receive on that today as well.
Well, I think that's just normal. I mean, we are a big interdependent world where these nations do an extensive amount of trade with China, with Russia, with other developing nations. I don't think we're in the old ages of where you have to play China against Russia. I think we're all beyond that.
Interesting.
Good to have you. So. How do you think everything's going? This is your first time here. It's good to see you. I know I asked you, how's Sean Spicer doing? I mean, he's...
Well, you know, I'll tell you, I used to spend my lunch hours briefing the White House press corps. This is a lot better. I prefer being with you guys.
Right? All right. I'll take that. Wear that inside. That's great.
Good to have you here today. All right. Well, it could be make or break moment as Republicans try to rally support for their bill to replace Obamacare, as President Trump claims he flipped some no votes to yes during a meeting a short while ago at the White House. Whether the president can work his art of the deal magic to pass this bill. Plus, the White House pushing back after Senate intel leaders say there's no evidence that Trump Tower was wiretapped. The fiery White House press briefing you do not want to miss.
Plenty of reporting on all of this.
No, but you want to cherry pick
connections
one commentary, one piece of commentary.
Associates of the president to the Russians, that has all been looked at.
No, wait, how do you know all this? How do you seem to be such an expert in this?
The White House firing back after Senate intelligence leaders say they've seen no evidence that Trump Tower was wiretapped. In a very contentious briefing with reporters, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer defending the administration and blasting what he sees as the media's double standard. Watch.
So, Sean, are you saying that despite the findings, the bipartisan findings of the Senate Intelligence Committee?
No, they're not findings. There's a statement out today. They have not begun this. It's interesting to me that, you know, just as a point of interest, that when one entity says one thing that claims one thing, you guys cover it ad nauseum. When Devin Nunes came out and said, I think it's very possible yesterday, there was crickets from you guys. There was no, hold on. And where was your passion and where was your concern when they all said that there was no connection to Russia? Where was it then? You crickets from you guys.
We have done plenty of reporting on all of this.
No, but you want to cherry pick
one
commentary, one piece of commentary.
Associates of the president to the Russians, that has all been looked at.
No, wait, how do you know all this? How do you seem to be such an expert in this?
Meantime, we could learn more about potential wiretapping evidence on Monday when FBI Director James Comey testifies on Capitol Hill. Okay, so when I watched Spicy yesterday, as I now call him, it's like SNL art imitating life, imitating art, imitating life. It's 1 degree away from the actual sketch. What do you make of this? This used to be your job.
Oh, man, I love watching. Wouldn't want to stay there, but I love to watch it. Look, I think Sean's doing a superb job. The job of the press secretary is to channel the president. It's to reflect what the president wants reflected. I mean, literally, the word in French for press secretary is porte-parole, which means to carry the words. He has to carry the president's words. It's not for him to be himself. It's not for him to agree or disagree. It's for him to do what Donald Trump wants him to do. And I think Sean's doing that, and he's doing it rather
Should he be
ably.
confronting the press like that, though? Sometimes
yes, sometimes no. I think on the pro and con side, his statement about where is your passion for dismissing the stories about the Trump connections to Russia. Sean's 100% right, and I was so glad to see his forceful pushback on that. The only thing I'd advise is use a little more humor. Smile a little bit more. If everything is so contentious and hot in that room, it can make people feel a little uncomfortable. So to the degree that Sean can mix it up with the humor, the way he said,
he should have
"Make
pushed
me
that
roll this
podium over."
night," that was brilliant. A little more of that.
Steal a little bit of that from the SNL is what you're talking about.
And not
from
only
the
from SNL, but smiling.
Self-deprecating.
Not everything is life and death in that room.
All right. We're going to break in with some breaking news right now because we've been telling you this hour that the president is meeting with the chancellor who's here from Germany, Angela Merkel. This is a meeting that had been postponed, and so all the eyes are looking at this right now, and we now have our first view of them in the at the White House. Let's take a peek at that together. And as they meet today, they're also scheduled for a bilateral news conference in about an hour from now. So they'll go into their meeting. This is that photo op that we always see with the two leaders, and every now and then you may hear a little bit of audio come up on the tape here. I don't see either one of them talking, so wait, hold on, let's listen.
How did your talks go, Mr. President?
Very good.
Talk about NATO?
Many things.
Sehr gut, danke. Freundlicher Empfang, gute Gelegenheit, sich zu unterhalten.
Thank you. All right.
All right, so you heard the president there answering a couple of questions. He was asked how their talk went. He said it went very well, and they covered a host of different things. And with that news conference that's coming up in about an hour, of course, one of the things that we might fully anticipate that they would talk about is immigration, the refugee situation that all of Europe has been dealing with, but particularly the Chancellor Merkel's country, because they have let so many people in who they knew had traveled from, to different areas that we all watch out for. So let's come back and talk more about the topic where we were. So I'm going to hand it back to you.
About Chancellor Merkel or Sean Spicer?
Let's talk about Sean Spicer.
Okay, so the question I was going to ask you earlier is, so I've been in politics debatably my entire life, and I have friends who, it doesn't matter how much I talk to them about politics, they could not have been less interested.
Right.
And all of a sudden they know who Sean Spicer is, they know who Steve Bannon is, they clearly know who everyone in the Trump administration, but they're really obsessed with Sean Spicer. Is that a good thing that he's sort of making being press secretary great again, I guess? I don't know how to put it.
Do you want to be the story?
Or you want to be the
Does the press secretary
story?
want to be the story,
Yes.
or is that not a good thing?
Well, I've always thought it was great. I mean, I love that job, and I really do think it's a wonderful, wonderful place to be. But you don't want to be the story. You want to be the explainer of the story. You want to be the explainer on behalf of the president. It's a reflection of the age we live in with Donald Trump, where everything is so amped up and red hot. Sean's a reflection of that.
But I mean, you just saw that exchange with the press where he's still handling these wiretapping allegations that the president is standing by.
Yeah.
And he's accusing the press of a double standard.
And he's right on that score.
And we actually have a clip right now of a reporter that's trying to toss a question to the New York Times in that press briefing yesterday.
I'd like to ask you about two topics, but can you help us all by calling off Peter right now?
No, I understand. I actually called the question. Alexis, if you don't want to answer the question, I can call on somebody else. No, thank you. Gabby.
Thanks, Sean.
What do you make of that?
They used to do that, too. It's a ricochet.
Nothing
They would try to get each other's questions answered if they didn't think it was sufficiently answered before. Look, I made the case that briefing should be taken off the TV shows. It should be taken off the air. I think it should be an explainer of what the president is thinking in a more respectful, thoughtful way, and not be a TV show in and of itself.
That is so
Take the cameras out of the room.
Well, in all fairness, they were never this interesting before. So you literally wouldn't be seeing them as often and as long as you would be, glued to the television.
But, Harris, I don't think that's a good thing. Because what this White House needs more than anything else, people thought it needed a shake-up. It needs a calm down.
Yep.
It needs just to return to the normal, difficult business of government and passing laws. Not everything should be red hot.
Right now? Do you think they're they're discussing that because these have been so contentious?
No.
But those journalists are asking important questions for the American people.
Sure.
You would agree that the American people can watch the television and see those exchanges happening and how important
No, because that makes it a TV show. I think you're stronger and you're better off with being a serious briefing to help reporters write stories.
I know we're talking a little bit about the reaction to the wiretapping, but there's been so much talk about what preceded that, and that were the leaks and the president's. And I saw you on Fox and Friends recently, and you said it is time for this president to show leadership on the leaks issue. What did you mean by that?
Well, he has to set the tone. The issue here was there'd be a criminal investigation, and what role should the White House have? The president needs to make clear to the FBI, the CIA, how seriously he takes it, and then step back and allow the investigators to figure out who was responsible for those CIA leaks. It's actually what Donald Trump has done.
Yeah, and so if you're at the lectern and you're asked about that, what kind of an answer do you give? Because what we're getting now is there is no evidence, there might be evidence, we can't talk about the...
Well, you're talking now about the
wiretapping and the leaks.
Look, the wiretapping, unfortunately, has been one of the greatest wastes of breath I've ever seen. I mean, it was a sad moment when the president issued those tweets that Saturday morning because he went too far. He had a nugget of truth. He hid his own nugget about wiretaps and the accusation that Barack Obama engaged in criminal activity. And this is a great lesson for Donald Trump. He is such a strong counterpuncher that sometimes he follows through and hits himself. If he hadn't gone that far, we wouldn't be talking about
How does he clean it up?
He just keeps digging and digging and digging, and I'm sure we will continue talking about it. We've got to go to a commercial break, but I'm really glad you're here. All right, the new Secretary of State not mincing words with North Korea, Rex Tillerson, detailing some possible dire consequences for the regime if they don't shape up, including preemptive military action. What he says could prompt the U.S. to act. Plus, it's being called a make-or-break moment for Republicans, how President Trump is playing deal-maker-in-chief on the GOP health care bill.
Well, the U.S. is talking tough on North Korea. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson arrived in South Korea, where he floated the possibility of launching a preemptive military strike against the regime if it continues to pursue its nuclear ambitions. Watch.
Let me be very clear. The policy of strategic patience has ended. If North Korea takes actions that threatens the South Korean forces or our own forces, then that will be met with an appropriate response. If they elevate the threat of their weapons program to a level that we believe requires action, that option is on the table.
In an exclusive interview with Fox News, Secretary Tillerson also refused to rule out the nuclearization of America's East Asian allies to keep North Korea in check. You know, what's interesting about this story, Ari, is when I first saw it breaking this morning, other news outlets were saying, oh, Tillerson says he's, willing to go nuclear on it. No kidding. I'm so glad we played the entire thing again, and I hope people watch it over and over. This isn't all that different from what we've been saying, but it is to the point.
Now, all options are on the table. That's been our standard policy for North Korea for decades. The other interesting thing he said was that the last 20 years of American policy toward North Korea have been a failure. And he's right. Bill Clinton got lied to by North Korea, George Bush got lied to by North Korea, and Barack Obama got lied to by North Korea. North Korea is one of the last vestiges on earth of absolute totalitarian communist dictatorship where the people are suffering, oppressed. Most of that country you could put into a prison camp. They're so hungry and they're enslaved. It is one of the worst human rights countries anywhere around the world. And frankly, we've tried to negotiate, we've tried to give them energy and food, and every time we do, they take what we give them and continue against their word to develop nuclear weapons.
Yeah, Ari brings up such a great point. When you look at just the health statistics in that part of the world and how they're suffering from malnutrition, so on and so forth, but their country has so much money. Jillian, it is a crime what they do to their own people, which brings us to tightening sanctions, which is what Tillerson and others are talking about within the administration. How does that work in a country that is so cruel already?
It doesn't work. But there's an important distinction, I think, to be made here. Getting the words right is extremely important, yes, and Secretary Tillerson has done that. I agree with you, Ari. He's right to point out that politics and diplomacy to try and get North Korea to denuclearize has failed. And that might be, that's correct. But that doesn't mean that the path forward is clear, as you well know, or that there's any kind of an easy answer. Any kind of tension here in this part of the world might lead to escalated conflict, to outright conflict at any point in time. I wanted to get this quote right, so I wrote it down because I liked it. The Chinese Foreign Minister Yi said yesterday that the United States and North Korea were like two accelerating trains on a collision course, which is really how I see the situation.
Yeah, nobody hitting the brakes.
It's explosive, and you've also got to be very careful. So you got to get the words right, but you actually have to get the policy right is more important.
Well, and Ari, what you were talking about earlier on a different topic, but it fits like tapestry here, is that, the secretary is walking out the diplomacy and the words of the president. So what would the president say on this issue? We've got a Trump tweet now, a President Trump tweet. North Korea is behaving very badly. They have been playing the United States for years. China has done little to help.
Well, it's an expert analysis. The president is right. The question is, what will he do about it? And that we don't know yet. He's especially right about China. For years, going back to the Clinton administration and including the Bush administration, we thought China was the solution. If we could put pressure on China to make them make North Korea behave better, we thought it could work. China wasn't interested. They won't play ball with us. They tolerate North Korea's bad behavior, but they won't clamp down on it. And so we really don't have many options. My hope, frankly, is like most of the totalitarian regimes around the world. It will crumble from within because it cannot stand. And when that day comes, we hope it comes peacefully to North Korea, but it has to come from within.
Well, one thing's for sure is Rex Tillerson has his work cut out for him. I mean, his exact words, the world needs a new strategy. Let me be very clear. The policy of strategic patience has ended.
I like the whole world. The world needs a new strategy. It's true, though, you know.
Well, when you have
foreign
somebody
policy
who's
across the
willing
globe
to
needs
go
be
nuclear, who's
recalculated.
test firing missiles and doing, I mean, it is the whole world who is watching. I'm curious, though, you know, this didn't work out the way that we thought it would with the sanctions. What will work?
Well, I think if what Tillerson is saying, we're no longer going to reward you for bad behavior and for lying, he's right, and that's what strategic patience has been. That if you promise us that you'll only develop 4 nuclear weapons instead of 6, we'll give you energy, we'll give you food. And then North Korea goes out and develops 12. You know, the original lie to Bill Clinton was they weren't going to develop any nuclear weapons, and we had the agreed framework, is what they call it, between the Clinton administration and North Korea. And North Korea promptly lied, developed nuclear weapons, which the tests were discovered under the Bush administration. They lied to Bill Clinton, they lied to George Bush. So you cannot reward foreign leaders, and especially tyrants, for lying, because they'll continue to engage in more worse behavior. We need a missile defense, and we need to be vociferous and tough to help our ally South Korea as well with conventional weaponry and with our military presence there. It's called deterrence.
All right. Well, it's being called a make or break moment now as Republican leaders try to rally support for their Obamacare replacement bill ahead of next week's expected vote in the House. President Trump hosting a group of conservative House Republicans at the Oval Office earlier, saying they are now all on board with the bill after previously opposing or questioning it. The president saying Obamacare is dead and it's time to move forward with the GOP's plan. Watch.
So I just want to let the world know I am 100% in favor. These folks, and they are tough, and they love their constituents, and they love this country. These folks were no's, mostly no's, yesterday. And now every single one is a yes. And I just want to thank you. We're going to have a health care plan that's going to be second to none.
But even if the bill passes in the House, it may be in danger of collapsing in the Senate. Republican Senator Susan Collins now says she will not support the bill in its current form, saying, quote, this bill doesn't come close to achieving the goal of allowing low-income seniors to purchase health insurance. We don't want to in any way sacrifice coverage for people who need it the most. Senator Rand Paul also says he will not vote for it. Republican leaders can only afford to lose 2 Republican votes in the Senate, we'll remind you. And this is being called a make-or-break moment for Paul Ryan. Do you see it that way?
Well, if it doesn't pass on the House floor, it's a make-or-break moment for Paul Ryan. But the fact that senators oppose it is meaningless at this stage. House will pass its bill. The Senate needs to pass its bill. And then you go into a conference to figure out, can you compromise the 2 bills? You know, I'm old school, and I started on the Hill in the 1980s. Congressmen didn't comment on what was going on in the Senate, and senators didn't comment on what was going on in the House. They did their own business and met in the middle. I'd love to return to those days, because let the senators pass a bill that they think can pass in the Senate. They don't have to reflect on the House bill. That's how our system works.
How would you describe the process now?
That's a nice
noisy.
Sounds mythological.
I'm guessing you're not.
Yeah, it was the old day.
I'm guessing you're not.
You can still get it done, though. This is the point. Look, on the House bill, think about how much coverage there's been about how difficult this is. Questions raised, conservatives opposed, can't pass. It's likely to pass on Thursday this week. Our process is working, and Donald Trump's a huge part of it. Look how he's got his shoulder to the wheel, working legislators to get things done. This is refreshing.
So can I expect Rand Paul, Justin Amash to be on the White House lawn in the Rose Garden saying, we all came together, fantastic, we have a bill, we're repealing and replacing, and we're all in collective agreement? You think the Freedom Caucus is going to do that?
Yeah, I think ultimately this is going to get enacted into law because it's too big to fail.
Okay.
If Republicans don't get their act together and
Yes.
get it passed, separate version in the House, separate version in the Senate, and then compromise. And the compromises are there. You can have flexible types of block grants. You can have phase-ins and phase-outs for Medicaid funding. This is the normal stuff of Washington. But we haven't done it for so many years. It's, they're stretching muscles that haven't been worked.
You think Paul Ryan saying it's a binary choice, you're either with us or you're with Nancy Pelosi, that's to be expected?
That was a mistake.
Okay.
You have to let House members express their will
Yes.
and influence the process.
So I'm guessing you're also not a fan of seeing him bang on H157, I want to see the bill, I want to see the bill. But in all, yeah, because he did, and that's fine. We can move on from that. So I take it from what you're saying, you're not really all that worried right now that what the president said he wanted in this bill, things like free market exchange across state lines, you know, and they're backing away a little bit from that idea of health care for everybody. It's access to health care for everybody. But you think that's not as big of a deal because we haven't seen what the Senate will do?
Well, I hate to speak Washington, but you cannot put those provisions in the repeal and replace bill because you have to get 60 votes for anything that's new that doesn't.
And you don't think Democrats would ever go for that?
Well, it'll be interesting. Depends on what they put in the full bill. There are going to be some other inducements for Democrats, but largely the burden's on Republicans. We have the majorities. We have to prevail.
I love sausage because this is us watching it being made, right? Little biscuit with that.
Yeah, but this is the ultimate ride or die moment for our president and Republicans to pull it together. 6 years of promises. We ran on repeal
More
and
for
replace.
them than him.
Replace along with repeal, and again,
that's why
get on the Harleys, ride for
President
Trump.
Trump does not want it to be Trump care. I mean, like, rightly so in that sense. He's like, you guys work out, you guys meaning Paul Ryan, House and Senate leadership, you make this sausage, make it work. Republican leadership, let me know how it turns out, how you're going to get it to work. You know, I want you to say yes. You figure out how to get there.
This is the day for corned beef.
He's like, this is not on me.
I'm just hungry. I don't even care. Give me some cabbage.
Another showdown looming. Supreme Court nominee Neil Gorsuch preparing for his Senate confirmation hearing Monday. This, as a top Democrat warns they may filibuster. So what can we expect? And
It's Washington. Of course the battle lines are drawn, but they really are. Ahead of Supreme Court nominee Neil Gorsuch's Senate confirmation hearing, it begins on Monday. Democrats are expected to hammer him with tough questions on immigration, the Trump administration's travel ban, abortion, and other hot-button issues. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says Democrats may decide to block his nomination, saying there's a great deal of skepticism about him in the caucus. Watch.
His record and his career clearly show he harbors a right-wing, pro-corporate special interest agenda. He enacted it time and time again on the 10th Circuit. And if given the chance, I have no doubt he would do it again on the Supreme Court.
Democrats may have the votes to block Gorsuch, since Republicans are 8 votes short of the needed 60 to advance the nomination. But Republicans could go nuclear, as they call it, changing the rules to require a simple majority vote. So I'm a little confused by this, because I have read that former members of the Obama administration actually have worked with him and liked him a lot, found him to be very even-handed and thoughtful conservative. Opposite their political view, maybe.
But tell us what you really think.
But all of that. What's the real deal here?
Well, I think all of us would be billionaires if we got $1 every time Chuck Schumer used the word right-wing or extreme. I mean, Chuck Schumer is a broken record on these things. Anytime he is up against anybody he doesn't like, this is his standard line about them. They're extremists, they're right-wing. And I think what he's faced here with Judge Gorsuch is a man who the 8 to 10 Democrats who are up for re-election in states that Trump won, almost all of them are giving a serious thought to voting for the judge. So I think Chuck Schumer's got a little bit of a rebellion in his own flank, but it's reflective of him reflecting the liberal wing of the Democratic Party.
What about those Republicans who are not on board?
Well, who's come out against him among the Republicans? Nobody, but the people that are sitting on their hands because they want to have the meetings, they want to have the hearings.
Okay, so it's
proper.
not necessarily, it's just kind of a vetting process is what you're,
okay. Right. You know, I have a lot of faith that actually do. That let Congress go through its normal routines, and particularly when you have one party that is in charge of the House, the Senate, and the White House, things get done, and it's a refreshing change.
Megan?
You're wildly unjaded by your time in Washington, D.C. I love this talk of the process takes faith in our government.
So refreshing.
I've seen it work multiple times, especially under George Bush. Really, it broke down under Barack Obama because, one, he didn't have the interest in legislating and really working the process, and two, you had divided government as soon as Republicans took
So
the
you
House.
think this will decidedly go different than like a Merrick Garland, whom President Obama wanted to put up?
Well, of course, it's already totally different, yes.
But when did the trend start, like what Chuck Schumer just did, where every Republican and every conservative, Gorsuch, by anybody's standard, is the rightful heir to Justice Scalia's seat, but every Republican is like the Babadook. It's like the most demon, evil, horror movie person you can find. You're so vilified for simply being conservative, and I do think that's a tone shift since the time when you were in D.C.
Well, it started while I was there. It really started with the Judge Bork nomination in 1987, I believe it was. And that really is the moment that the people clashed in Washington and never stopped clashing. And it's only gotten worse since then. And I regret that. But I can cite part and parcel of how many times there's a big enough group that got over the hump and passed majority legislation to get enacted into law. The biggest change I'd make, I would totally abolish the filibuster.
Oh, interesting.
That'll help Republicans some years, it'll help Democrats other years, but we're a majority rules nation, and the filibuster trains people to oppose and to block, not to figure it out and get it done.
Jillian, because you've worked across two different administrations, I'm curious to get your idea about this question. Why is it that when some win in Washington, it means that the other side absolutely has to lose? Why can't it be that the nation got another Supreme Court justice?
Why is everything zero-sum?
Yeah.
All I can say is...
You've seen it from both perspectives.
And I've been living there now in the city for 10 years. And I will say, what President Trump said the other day about, in yesteryear, Republicans and Democrats used to argue on the House and Senate floor and then go out for drinks after. It doesn't really happen anymore. It's on a personal level. If you go to the Hill and you meet with senators and their staffers, there's so much vitriol, and that is something that I don't think is going away no matter how you negotiate policy, no matter how many votes, healthcare gets passed by. That's something that's cultural, and you have to change that in Washington. I don't pretend to have the
They got to do it outnumbered style. We'll go grab something with you. And Rachel Maddow is facing some serious backlash for her report on President Trump's taxes. Now